Well,
Thank you.
that's where we're going to start. Funny you should say that. Your show last night,
Yes.
if you can judge the respect that a performer has by the number of fellow performers that show up at his show, last night at one point I saw Cyril Neville, Trixie Minx, Susan Cowsill, who's not technically on the bill this year but will be next year for this cruise, and Marsha Ball, at least.
Yes.
Got to make you feel good.
It did, man, and I made Marsha Ball cry.
Amongst other people. Amongst other
Look,
people.
I was on the verge. There's a mixture of emotion that you can put in and your real sound, right? And you can cross that line where. Thank you. Everybody always tells me that.
I'm telling John how to use a microphone. That's not right.
But if you get too emotional, then you can't project. You can't. Nobody comes to see you cry. I come to make you cry. Not really. But so it was very emotional last night. Also because Todd Duke.
Yep.
Remember Todd Duke, my
Yep.
guitar player for 25 years, 30 years, or whatever. He passed on January 6th. So.
Right, a lot going on. A lot going on, yeah. We'll talk about that in a second. At one point, your tambourine tumbled to the stage. Cyril Neville is a pretty damn good tambourine player as well. Was that just being nervous that Cyril was watching you with a tambourine and you kind of freaked out?
No, I think it was the plot of the tambourine to knock over the coffee on my iPhone. Because I put it on a chair and I didn't know it was there. And we were doing the Cyndi Lauper's tune time after time, and a band likes to do that because we just do it very openly, and just let it get spacey. And when the first tambourine fell, it was by mistake, and my guitar player said today, I thought you did that on purpose. It was perfect. So, yeah, that's why I hit the ground, so I want to just continue with that. I did it two more times, and I think Pedro, who gave me that tambourine, who's in the audience, I didn't want him to think I was abusing his tambourine. I felt bad about it afterwards.
Right, I don't think the audience saw the fact that when the tambourine fell, it knocked over your coffee mug. And who was it? Was it Oscar that rescued your cell phone out of the pool of coffee on the stage?
No, I think it was the sound lady.
The sound lady came over and got it. She earned her keep last night. Yeah, she's working hard. She's working hard. One of the reasons you played that room, the Ocean Bar, is because you are very adamant that you prefer to perform with acoustic pianos as opposed to electric pianos. Why is that? Why is that such a big deal for you?
Because when you have an instrument, a hammer hitting a string, vibrating through a piece of wood, you can feel that. You can literally feel that, like with the bass, the acoustic bass, and the drums, and even an acoustic guitar. If the lights went out, we could still sing. We could still make the music. And I saw that in Italy with my sister Lillian, where we were, I think we were in Gaeta, and there was a thunderstorm going on, and it blew all the lights out. And there were like 300 Italian people there, right? And they took their scooters to put the lights on the stage. And because it was an acoustic band, they could continue to play, but they were quiet. And to do that, that's pretty interesting to keep 300 Italian people quiet. Don't get mad at me, I'm like 2 or 11% Italian.
I'm 25%. I'm not offended. It's cool. So it's cool. You mentioned the Cyndi Lauper song "Time After Time,"
Yes.
which people that have not seen your sets before may be surprised that you included that pop hit. Why does that song speak to you as a jazz vocalist?
Well, I like the lyrics. The lyrics are beautiful, and I can also remember them. And I remember when I first brought that idea to the band, I was like, man, that's a pop tune. I said, well, tell that to Miles Davis, because he recorded it too. He certainly did. And so they were like, okay.
Right, hit the Miles Davis seal of approval. That worked for them. Yeah.
Yes. But I also, I think Cindy is a great songwriter, and we have so many wonderful female writers and performers. And I have, you know, 6 sisters and an incredible array of women in my life. So, who?
To snitch on you.
Yes.
To snitch on you.
Oh yes. But you know, so I like doing songs by some female writers sometimes.
You know, in an indication of just how deep you are enmeshed in the world of New Orleans music, last night you sang Lipstick Traces, which is an Alan Toussaint composition. Playing the drums for you last night was Herman LeBeau, who is Alan's son-in-law, and his wife, Alan's daughter, Allison, was there in the audience.
Yes,
So,
yes.
so that weaves multi-generations and you know, yeah, less than 6 degrees, yeah, I mean, right there.
Well, so Alan, I was introduced to Alan by my sister Lilia, who was one of his background singers in the 70s. And I remember, you know, she'd go to not Kingsway, what's the name of the studio?
Ultrasonic.
CSAN.
CSAN.
Studios.
Alan's studio.
Right. And when she would go, I was like, you know, I was not worried about hanging out with my buddies. I would be waiting for her to say, you want to come along, right? So I went to the studio with her my first time, and I saw Alan and how he performed, how his fellow musicians that he hired respected him, how he treated them so good. And I would never forget that. You know, he was such an incredible musician, and he was just a true gentleman. You know, I'm an officer and a gentleman, but he's a gentleman.
You are an actual officer.
Right, and he was just another thing. He was a vet too, you know. So he was a 1%er. You know, he served, and he was just a great guy. Also, when he walked in the room, this session, I think they were recording Southern Nights.
So,
And he had a beautiful layout in the studio for people to eat and do whatever they had to do before they started recording. And it was like, I think, I'll say about 4 o'clock they started. So about 3:45, everybody was milling around, getting in the seats, blah, blah, blah. And by 5 minutes before, everybody was tuned up and just sitting there. And at 4 o'clock, Alan just walked in, went to the piano, and said hello to everybody, and he started playing. And I was like, wow. And then then I saw him pull up to pick my sister up in a Rolls Royce. And I was like, he must be getting paid well.
Alan did all right.
He did good, man.
I mean, yeah, when when Glenn Campbell has the #1 hit with your composition,
Wow.
I mean, that pays the bills amongst many others.
And last year, man, everybody, I think it was Little Feat,
Mhm.
And everybody tipped their hat to Alan last year, He actually, after, I think it was after the Levy's Field in New Orleans, he sent me 2 CDs, 3 CDs, and he had my picture on it. He had printed it with my picture on it. He had the lyrics to every song that he was sending me, and they were all in different colored and shaped paper clips. Just the detail, and everything. And I should have done every last one of those songs. I only did 2.
Well, you got something to strive for down the road. You can do the other.
Absolutely.
Let's back up. 7 sisters, right?
6 sisters.
6 sisters. 7 total. What effect did that have on you growing up with 6 sisters?
Well,
Other than being snitched on, yeah. Other than that.
you learn how to duck. No, man, look, I was dancing, and we were singing on Saturdays, they'd have not the radio, they would be spinning records while we were cleaning the house. And then afterwards, they would have a talent show in the front, and they would be singing to the brooms, and when you got 10 kids in the house, and we had I tell you, we were so lucky with my mother and father, man. I had the best parents. I never, ever heard them say unkind word to one another in front of us, ever. And I always was wondering, man, you know, this ain't natural. So I remember I was on my way into the military, and I was like, you guys, don't y'all ever have bad days? She said, they both laughed, said, we had bad years, but you guys didn't know nothing about it, you know? And that's real love.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. They knew it was best for the kids, not to see all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
But I did, you know, just before I got in the service, okay, Mom, I'm gonna tell a story. My dad, he was never a heavy drinker. He only drank beer on the weekends when he went fishing. And when he was coming back in, if he didn't take us fishing with him, and he came back a little tipsy, we knocked him down and took all the change out of his pockets. And another thing about him, 10 kids. He was a postman. He was the first black postman to be on the front desk in New Orleans because he didn't look that black.
He wasn't that black.
He was very black. Look, in Louisiana, you know, in Louisiana, all of y'all are black. That's just the truth. But I gotta just finish this with my dad. Every day when he came home from the post office, he had a gift for every one of his kids. I don't care if it was a piece of gum, a peppermint, a box of Cracker Jacks, but every day. Yeah.
Wow, no, that's cool. That makes me feel like I'm not
Yeah.
living up to your dad's standards with my kids. Jeez.
You
I should have picked up something in Key West today. Oh well.
You a bad daddy.
10 kids. They were Catholic, right?
Yes, very
Yes,
Catholic.
yes, very Catholic.
Generations of Catholic, but the funny thing is my mother has the Tay-Sachs disease. You know what that is?
What is it?
Tay-Sachs.
Tay-Sachs.
I can't say it, but she has it. And that's a Jewish sickle cell. So she went to a doctor and he said, "You're Jewish?" She said, "No, I'm Catholic." Yes, she is. Yes, she is, because her grandfather was a Melungeon, and that's the American Indian tribe in the Appalachians, which were American Indians, enslaved blacks, free blacks, Scot-Irish and Irish, and Hasidic Jews, and that's when you get me. Mixed with a Creole.
The true gumbo, as we
The
say.
true
Yeah,
gumbo.
the true gumbo.
On that part, 10 kids, my mother's cousin birthed all of us, right? And she was not a midwife, she was a gynecologist and one of the first black female doctors in Louisiana. And I remember the story she said when she was coming out of the mask after she got her degrees and she was officially a doctor, and the priest said, "Oh, coffee." He didn't want coffee, her name was Coffee. Say, "Oh, Coffee, just think in 50 years how things will be." And she looked at him and said, "Sorry, Padre, try 500. She said, "Why would you say that?" She says, "Because we're all gonna look like this." And she's so right about that. Absolutely. And you know, I say that to my audience all the time. We're all 54 cousins, and that's science. And are we in Florida? No, we're not anymore. Oh, yes, we are.
We're still in Florida waters, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. Still in Florida.
We're still here. So, and I come from Louisiana, but I do believe in science.
I think we're only ranked 49th in education. I think Mississippi's behind us. I think
We're in number none.
we're number 49.
We're in the race, man. We're in the race.
All right, so you went to Xavier University in Louisiana. You're a business major. You joined the ROTC program, and then you were commissioned into the Army.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, it's in a way it's surprising that you hadn't set your course for a music career at all at that point, and then B, you go in the Army for all these for what 4 years you did? Is that right?
I did 4 years active, and I would say 8 years, 2 years reserve, but 4 years ROTC. So actually 10 years, because when you sign that contract in college, if you have below C average, you're going in as a private. So I didn't roll the dice because I knew I was smart enough to make it through. I would be able to maintain my grades. But I didn't have that money to pay for college. After I paid for my first semester, I remember my dad walked me to the bank. It was my first loan, right? And he co-signed for me, not for a car, but for my first trimester of college. And then I saw the ROTC program, and I said, okay. I rolled the dice thinking, America goes to war every 20 to 10 years, right? And we've been out for a while. I said, I got about 10 years to get in there.
What year was it?
This was I signed up in ROTC in 1976. I was totally out of my obligations by 86. But that's when we went to Grenada. Right? And it was like, exactly, I'm like, a little taste of blood, here we go. Here we go again. War. What is it? Why? Just why? I'm like, all I'm gonna say is government sanctioned murder in any country. And you know, we're not supposed to be killing each other. That's just stupid. You know, it's just stupid.
What was your gig in the Army? Were you just what did you do?
I had a good gig. My first gig, I was a transportation officer in the 502nd S&T in Fort Hood, which is not Hood anymore.
Right.
And I can't remember what they call it, but I'm glad they changed it. I also was at Fort Lee, and I never went to the officers club, right? Because Lee just ain't my guy. Right? Personally, I thought that Appomattox, y'all know what Appomattox is? Yeah. That's why I like educated people. They should have took his rank off him, took his sword, took his arms, and took his horse, and tell him to walk home.
Walk home.
But they let him walk away with his horse, his rank, and his weapon, and that's why we are where we are.
Yeah, history does not go away.
That's
It's
why
still,
we
it's
are
always
where
there.
we are, man.
It's always there. Is there any vestige of an army man still in you? I mean, is there something about your personality that is still Army?
I like giving orders. And I tell you, asked me, my last job, I was actually a commander of the headquarters company. So I had colonels who were in my company, and I was technically their commander, right? But I outranked them. And I can remember when I walked into that job, there was this sergeant major. He was like a typical sergeant major. He was an Irish guy. And when I walked in, he looks at me, and I wasn't in uniform. He says, "What do you want, son?" I said, I'm reporting for a duty, Sergeant Major. He says, "All right, go see Sergeant so-and-so, and he'll get you your things." I said, he says, "What's your name?" I said, "Lieutenant Boutté." He said, "Oh." So later when I met my commander, and he asked me what job I wanted, I said, "The best job in the battalion. That's what I want." He says, "Well, that's taken." I said, "Well, give me the second best." And that's why he made me the commander.
All right, that's good. Off you went.
Off I went.
Off you went. One of the more interesting jobs that you had, and this will eventually circle back to music. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Yes.
The coroner's office?
Yes.
So-
I worked at the morgue.
John worked at the morgue in Orleans Parish, and back to the notion of 6 degrees of separation in the New Orleans music community. You worked on the death warrants of.
Let me just first say that the first night, and you can't make this up, the first night I worked in the city morgue in New Orleans was Halloween. And if you don't believe me, you can look this up. It's factual because the lights went out in the city, right? So I'm in the morgue in darkness, right? And I hear somebody banging on the door downstairs. I'm like, I'm not going down there. it continued. So I went down. There was a guy from the Times-Picayune, and he wanted to, he was going around taking pictures of people in the dark. Well, why not start at the morgue?
That's how we think. That's how reporters
There's
think.
a
Yeah.
picture of me with my college books on the table and with a oil lamp and a cap on my head. Anyway, my job was not to deal with the bodies themselves, but I would take the phone call, take the information from either police officer or family member, et cetera, and report the death. And then afterwards, I'd have to make a synopsis, a little, maybe a 3-paragraph sentence of what went on after the autopsy was done. And I just happened to be, have signed on with Professor Longhair and James Carroll Booker's death certificates. And I knew them both personally, so I was like, yeah.
So two of the greatest piano players in the history of New Orleans
Isn't that
music, and
crazy?
you signed off on both of their
Yes.
death certificates.
Yes.
Wow.
I didn't kill him, that's for sure.
Good to know. Good to know. So when did you make the decision, though? What finally tipped you into pursuing a career in music as a full-time
I
thing?
always wanted to play a horn, man. I always wanted to do music. At 8 years old, I wanted to do music, And my mother, I had an asthma attack. This is what happened. I had an asthma attack when they were tearing down the interstates. Tearing down the trees in New Orleans on Claiborne Avenue, that beautiful orchard of trees on Claiborne. And I was also the economic engine for black people on that street. And they just came down and tore down the trees and put up the interstate. And when they were doing that, the particulates in the air, all the stuff that was coming up, I developed asthma. Right, so Coffee Boutté, back to coffee, my mom brought me to her. She settled me down, and my mother asked, well, what are you going to do? Does he need constant medication? She says, no, get him a horn, right? That's good doctrine, man. Don't get him a horn. And I never had another asthma attack.
Because blowing the horn
Right.
exercised your lungs and caused you.
Right, man. Screaming at my sisters didn't work.
You had lots of practice.
But I used to sing to them, and that's how I knew the power of song, right? Because I would sing. My sister was in college studying fine arts, and she was Lolette, and I would sing next to her door. I was in kindergarten, so they were teaching us these tunes like "It's March and we hear the wind blowing." Ooh. Well, when you got that on repeat, like 50 times, you know what I'm saying, and you have to go to school the next morning, she would come out screaming, "Shut up!" And I'd say, "Really? We love our flag, our beautiful flag, the red, the white, the blue." But I found the power. What'd you ask me?
What finally tipped you over to actually pursue music for real,
Right, exactly.
other than being in the army and being in the morgue, et cetera, et cetera? Yeah.
And so anyway, I had great band teachers, Miss Stamps, first Mr. Levine in elementary school, Miss Stamps and Mr. Levine, Mr. Houston, who was had the orchestra in New Orleans that played for all the balls, and he had one of the only black music stores on Claiborne Avenue, and he was my junior high school music teacher, and we would get postcards from Count Basie, Duke Ellington, when I was in junior high school, and sometimes they'd come in when they were in town, to see him and see what he was doing with the students. Then Miss Stamps was my high school teacher. But New Orleans had a music system in their schools, man, in the public schools. if you didn't have an instrument, they had an instrument they would give you. And they had incredible teachers, and was so important for my mental development, man. I think it just made me smarter and made me just more keen and open-minded about everything. So I can't, it breaks my heart when I see schools, we need math, but music is math. It's all of that, you know? And so it hurts me when I see they trying to cut the arts. You know, it's like Churchill said, you know, what are we fighting for? You know? And that's what I'm fighting for.
Well, yeah, right. And it's not just cutting out music doesn't just mean, oh, you know, we're having our students concentrate on more important things. The music, even if you don't become a musician, develops your skills for other things, for, as you said, math and thinking and everything else.
Right.
So yeah, so it's key. Yeah.
So then, you know, when I got out of college, when I got out of high school, there's a program, the NOCA school, right? That
New Orleans Center for
New
Creative
Orleans,
Arts. Yeah.
right? So they wanted to put me in there, but my mom said no because she thought they would be holding me back from, you know, graduating. You know, I was already I graduated from high school at 17, you know, and college at 20. So I mean, but I missed that program because I would have been in the first batch of NOCA kids.
Well, and NOCA, I mean, has produced Trombone Shorty, John Boutté, Terrence Blanchard. So it didn't really hold
Quincy
them back.
Marsalis.
Marsalis, yeah, the Marsalis, etc. So it's
Harry Connick.
Harry Connick Jr. That's right.
And lots of actors, and now they're producing incredible artists also. But anyway, when I can remember, I said when I was going into college, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I knew it would be music. And then of course they said, those Creoles say, you need something to fall back on. And I said, I'm not falling back. If I'm falling back, I'm going in the wrong direction. Sorry. Avante, baby, Avante, I want to go forward. But it was practical. I studied business and economics, but I still kept up with my music, and I took classical piano at that time. And so I never really stopped the music. And then when I got into the Army, as an officer, you can't fraternize with anybody who's not an officer, right? But I could go to church and they couldn't tell me who I could talk to, right? Or who I could sing with or play music with. So while I was in Korea and also in Fort Hood, I was playing gospel piano for church services, which was really fun, man. You know, it was a good time. I just love singing with people, man. But singing together is so powerful. You know, I think I made y'all sing a little bit last night, but.
Made it. Yeah, exactly. Forced you guys. Yeah, forced them. Has your voice, the texture of your voice is so rich and so expressive. Have you always had this sort of kind of, I mean, rasp is the wrong word, but has it always had this kind of grainy quality to it?
Always, man. Even as a little bitty kid, in my voice. When I got to college at Xavier, they sent me to a doctor to see if I had nodules on my vocal cords. None of that. This is just how it is. And it was one of the reasons why I actually quit my banking job. After I got out of the military, I went back to the coroner's office. Just for a little while, right? You know, I didn't want to take unemployment.
You were dying to go back. Sorry. Where's Herman LeBeau with the rim shot? Where is he? Yeah. Damn.
No,
Good.
but so I went back to do the weekends because it was easy. It was something I could do. I was living in the quarters. It was easy peasy. And then I became a banker, right? And I was a VP of a credit union in New Orleans, the largest black credit union in the South. It was Corpus Christi, right? And one day a friend of mine's, Tim Francis, I'll call his name, he called me up and asked me if he could use my electric piano. It was a DX7, I had bought. And I told him, man, that ain't no toy. He says, just bring it up to this hotel room. So I brought it up to the hotel room. I was with Lillian. She was recording with Jeanette Kimball at the time at Ultra Sound, or one of those little studios. And he calls me back 3 days later and said, man, come get your DX7. I said, come get it. I said, man, bring it to my house. He said, I'm gonna leave it in the hotel room. And I was so upset with him. I'm like, what is wrong with this guy? So I get in my car, I run up there, and I'm about to bang on the door, and I hear somebody playing. And I'm like, what? They're just playing the blues. I said, no way. He opens the door, and there's Stevie Wonder on my door. That I just threw haphazardly on the end table and said, you put it wherever you want to put it. And so I spent the day with him. It was a life-changing day for me because he told me I had a signature voice. And I was like, what's that, dude? He says, in the industry, we call it a signature voice because you don't sound like anybody. You sound like you. And I was like, what? Take me with you. I asked him 3 times until I was not embarrassed. And the third time, he said, I can't do that. I said, well, what do I have to do? He says, patience and determination. And I said, take me with you. And he didn't want to leave, man. We were sitting, it's so funny, he didn't want to leave the hotel because he had a little jam session going on, right? We started a little jam session, we were sitting on the couch and singing some harmonies. He had an assistant, no, his background singer, Lena Summers, I think it was. And we were getting the harmonies together on this. Lena walked in the room and he went, ra-ka-cha, ba-ta-ka-ka-cha, ra-ka-cha, ba-ta-ka-ta-ta. Yolina, Yolina, Yolina. Yolina, Yolina, Yolina. Like that, right? And so we started harmonizing it. And it was rolling a bit. And then it went out of harmony. And I turned around and said, Stevie, I think you're flat.
Stevie, I think you're flat. After the man had just said you had a signature voice, you criticize his.
The room went. And I think he found it comical too, because he went, John, I'm Stevie Wonder. I'm never flat. I said, well, I guess I'm a little sharp, huh? But anyway, man, I quit my banking job the next day. I walked in, I forgot to shave, and I forgot my tie. And this guy, who I know had never served, told me, Boutté, you're not shaving. Oh, sorry, Where's your tie? Oops. Go home, get your tie, and shave, and bring yourself back. And I was like, okay. And I went home. I got on my veranda, made a mint julep because I had fresh mint. Same boy, I never used to drink that kind of stuff, gin, but I did back then. And I made one, and I was sitting there on the porch, and the phone rang, and the guy says, where are you? I said, at my house. He said, have you lost your mind? I said, nope, just found it. This is my 2-week notice, thank you, Clint. And I never went back, and my mother, who told me, she says, I always knew my children were lying to me. It's a good skepticism, right? Because when she asked me what happened, I said, Mom, let me tell you, it was time for me to go, and those guys have been finagling the money, right? And she said, really? So she thought I was really telling her a big story. I'll never forget, I was going to England, and I opened up a letter from her as I'm coming up to the White Cliffs of Dover, right? And she said, I always figure my kids are telling me stories, right? Lying to me. But she said that she saw the feds walk everybody out of that credit union, right? I said, I told you so. She said, you okay? I said, I'm absolutely fine, right? I ain't done nothing wrong, one thing I was afraid to take, I never wanted to steal, because I always had something, you know? I never had no desire to steal. When you got, why do you want to take, you know what I'm saying? So, anyway, that was my beginning of singing. And then, luckily, when I got home, my sister Lillian called me that same day and said she needed help with the logistics, somebody driving her van, helping her with the sound, et cetera, in Europe. And I said yes. And she sent me tickets the next week, and I never turned back, you know.
Wow. So it was kind of meant to be. I mean, the timing all lined
Absolutely, man. It was absolutely meant to be.
up. Stevie Wonder set you on your course. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, professionally, he gave me that confidence that I could say, well, Stevie Wonder told me I could sing.
That's right. And you told him he was flat. So there you go. Yeah. Last night at the show, you did Paul Simon's American Tune.
Oh, yes.
But you didn't do the original lyrics. In the original song, he refers to the Mayflower, and as you sang it, you referred to the
Amistad, the boat.
the slave ship that was where the enslaved folks
Absolutely.
revolted and took over the ship, and basically they sailed to America anyway, and the case went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, I think, ultimately sided with them.
Right.
Talk about that, and you've done it with other songs, we'll mention some, but when you take a popular tune like that, obviously it's important for you to put your own
Put that, you know,
flavor.
and lots of times I never think about it. It's just like, sometimes I forget the lyrics, and I gotta figure out what can fit. But on that one, it was intentional to bring up the Amistad, and also to bring on the fact that it was sailed on a bloody moon. Slavery was, you know, I can't talk about it, you know, because it's just one of the worst things that, and we still have slavery going on in the world, you know. It's still around, you know. And that's when people have too much money and they just think they don't realize they're putting their cousins in bondage, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a horrible thing, and we're not over it, man. And it's a sin in America, but we won't say it's a sin because it's a tragedy, and we've never looked at it. We've never ever apologized. We never had truth and reconciliation like they had in South Africa. Instead, we have an illegal South Africa. That's all I can say.
He's probably listening right now, so be careful.
What is he gonna do? Make me black and a jazz musician? In Louisiana?
There are worse fates, sir. There are worse fates. So, all right, that was one example of you changing a lyric. There was another one, and this was one of your, I think, watershed moments as a performer. Do you know what I'm getting at?
Oh, yes.
It is chronicled in the book I have here. It's called Groove Interrupted, written by a very fine writer.
Really?
Me. There's a chapter on the 2006 Jazz Fest, which was the first one after Hurricane
Oh,
Katrina.
yeah.
So this Jazz Fest played out, much of the city was still in ruins. From the fairgrounds, you could look out at the houses in the surrounding neighborhood and still see blue tarps. The city was very, very raw. This was the Jazz Fest where Bruce Springsteen played with his Seeger Sessions band and did that amazing set. You were in the jazz tent, and you sang Randy Newman's Louisiana 1927. I kind of get chills just thinking. I'm going to read. You changed the lyric, a couple of lyrics in it. Instead of 6 feet of water in the streets of Evangeline, you sang about 6 feet in the lower 9.
Right.
Instead of, this, let's say, I'll just read the lyrics as you sang them. Bush flew over in his airplane with 6 fat men with martinis in their hand. Bush said, "Fat man, great job. Look what that river has done to this poor Creole's land."
That's exactly what I said, except I said Bush flew over in his airplane. What's those other lyrics?
Who's what?
s-
Six fat men with martinis in their hand. Bush said, "Fat man, great job. Look what this river."
6 martinis in a hand, and I did.
Yeah, that didn't translate to the printed page, so I couldn't really replicate that sound. So, all right,
Listen to the record, you'll hear it.
well, I say, so, all right, so leading up to that performance, though, did you tell me how you prepared for that? And you knew that you had to do something, obviously. So tell me what the lead up to it was, and then the performance for you, how it felt for you.
Well, you know, that arrangement of that song was arranged by Leroy Jones.
The trumpet player, great trumpet
Yes,
player.
he did all the horn section, the horn arrangements, and I had an incredible band, man. Unfortunately, can't remember all the guys' names in the horn section, but I had an incredible band, and I was just so emotional, man. You know, everybody was, and I honestly, I think that's the first time I've referenced Bush and the Lower Nine and that whole thing, right? It just came out.
That was the first time at that Jazz Fest show.
I never sang it like that before. I sang it about the lyrics, the original lyrics. And by the way, Paul Sanchez turned me on to that tune.
Paul Sanchez, great singer-songwriter from New Orleans, who was in a band called Cabo Mouth for many years,
Right.
But has written a bunch of stuff. Done a lot of work with John.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So he was the one that introduced you to Randy Newman's original version.
That and City of New Orleans and so many other tunes that, I knew, but, he was like, you ought to do this, so that was one of them.
You came off and, well, I'm just going to read you the quote that's in the book. After that show, a woman told you that scores of listeners had fled the jazz tent. And here's what you told me. You said, I thought I'd pissed somebody off getting on my soapbox, but they were running out crying. They weren't just crying, they were heaving. They were leaving to get their composure. There were a lot of people that were in tears that day. And then you said, if they don't carry them out, I didn't do my best. You didn't do your best. You did your best at that. I gotta say, that was amazing.
Well, thank you very much. That record, that recording is on the Smithsonian recording, also one of the folk records. But yeah, that was a real moment that. Let me just say this: the next year, I did Why. And I was looking in the audience, and I saw a woman crying, and I saw another lady crying, and I saw some guys crying, and then I saw the babies crying because they saw their parents crying. Uh-oh, I'm gonna stop there, right? But I tried. I sing with emotion, man. I sing from the heart. I never really had a singing lesson in my life. I did have music lessons, and I learned how to breathe from playing the horn and everything, but I just do what I do, man. Sometimes I don't feel like doing it, but there's this genie inside me that can rub my belly. One more time, please. And it just comes out, man, it's because I just try to be honest. That's the only way I can do the music. And I got such a great band, especially now. That's one thing I've learned, man. You have to have good musicians. And, but not only these guys, great musicians, they're good people. And that really is important. And when I see them, it's like I was in junior high school again, and somebody said, let's go play some football, I was a good football player. So it's good. It's good when you have a team behind you that also lets you be your best, and that's what I have right now also.
Absolutely. Everybody saw it last night knows that. Another watershed moment for you, a certain TV show. HBO's Treme.
Yep.
You sang the theme song, Treme's song, which, and I think you played it last night. Such a great song, as catchy of a New Orleans tune as has come out in the last 20 years for a while.
Yes.
Can you describe when you got the call that was going to happen, that they were going to use that as the theme song? I mean, that was kind of, I don't know if life change is a bit much, but I mean, that exposed you to a whole lot of people. And I imagine you made a couple bucks from it.
Oh, yes. Well, I can tell you, first off, with the Treme song, I recorded that for Bose, the Bose Corporation, because they use my voice in their kiosks around the world to sell their speakers, right? The sound system. And I met the guy who asked me to record at the French Quarter Fest. And this is when it was really loosey-goosey, and my band didn't show up. So I'm like, oh my gosh. So what did you do? I went up there and I started singing on the mic. And next thing I know, I was singing by myself, and next thing I know, I saw James Andrews was in the audience.
Trumpet player, great trumpet player.
And he came out and he started playing drums, right?
Okay.
And that's the band. I just organically got a band from musicians who saw that I need musicians, right? And the guy was so impressed. He said, "How did you do that? That's such a wonderful way you brought them on." I said, "Dude, my band didn't show up." But he pursued me for like 3 months to do that recording, and when I finally said yes, I said, "Look, I want you gotta, this is what I want, this, that. And it's gotta be a 1-page contract. If it's more than 1 page, save your stamp, I don't wanna see it." And so he called me up the next day, he said, "I'm sending the contract, it's 2 pages. I said, "What?" He says, "The lawyer said we need 1 page just for your signature." I said, "Fair enough."
Okay. Second page with signatures.
So, yeah, good negotiation. Anyway, I did 2 CDs with those guys.
With Bose.
And then after Katrina, I was in Canada, in Penticton, way north, almost to the Yukon. And there in Penticton, they had the town's motto was, "Come and never leave," right? Because they were the biggest graveyard around that area. Well, I was there, there was a funeral passing, I was, wow, right? So when I got back home, let me just back up a second to say that Bose contacted me, and they were very sympathetic about the situation I was in after the hurricane. Not after the non-hurricane, that is, after the levees failed. Because, and it's the levees failed, y'all, nothing else. And the levees failed because we failed. So I called Bose and I said, they asked me, what did I want? I said, no, they called me and said, "Look, we're gonna have to hire a forensic accountant, an accountant just to keep up with sending out royalty checks, et cetera, for you." I said, "Look, you keep that. Don't hire nobody. Just give me the masters. Give me the masters to that CD, or both of them, and you can use it. I don't care how you use it. Just give it to me." And they did. And then when I got back from Penticton, I'm sitting there washing dishes, looking at in my grand-aunt's house that was destroyed. Well, it was fixed by that time. Watching my mother's house, the house I grew up in. I'm washing dishes, looking out the window. I love washing dishes, believe it or not. It's such a mundane task, but I'm getting something done. My hands are warm. I can think, my mind just goes off, right? Phone rings, I pick up the phone, and there's a guy with a British accent. He says, "Boutté, I can't do a British accent, sorry." But he says, he's with HBO and da. And I thought it was one of my friends, and I hung up on him. So he calls back, right? He says, "Don't hang up." He says, "My name is Blakely. If you don't believe me, call this production company." I said, "All right, dude, what do you want?" And he said they wanted the Treme song. And I said, "Beautiful." And he says, "Well, we're going to get in touch with your lawyers." I said, "What for?" He said, "So we can handle contracts and stuff." I said, "I don't need no lawyer, man. I'm an educated Creole. I read with comprehension." Very well. So anyway, it was easy peasy because once I signed the contract with them, they picked up four more of my tunes and put in the series. They did White Christmas, that I did for Putumayo, but they also used 4 songs from my Bowl CDs, which was really great. And anyway, that changed my life, man. You know. And I can remember going to my mom and told her, I said, I think I hit the lottery. She said, really? What number did you play?
So taking ownership, trading the ownership of the masters, getting the ownership of those recordings back, that was the key decision, right?
It was, because then when I own the masters, that means I own the whole thing, right? Because the song, at least for the songs that I wrote, all the original tunes that I wrote, I had 100% of those tunes. So I got 100% of the money instead of a nickel on the dollar. And it's a great tune. I'm not gonna lie to you. When I wrote that tune, it was so silly. I wrote it, and after I walked back from the piano, I just smiled and said, that was special, right? And it was the last one I put on the CD. And Shannon Powell was on that CD.
Shannon Powell, the drummer.
Shannon Powell's a drummer, and he basically, they was like, what tunes are that? I think it was Shannon who said, "Let's treat me a song, bro," like that. I said, yeah, man, let's do that one, because he asked me, do you have another tune? If I would have been smarter, I would have done all originals on that CD, because Bose, the first printing, they printed 365,000 copies of that CD, and they gave me a lot of money. But it would have been much more, because I only had 2 originals on the CD, right? So if I'd had a whole CD of originals, man, Treme might have never happened, because I'd have moved to
Monaco or Switzerland or someplace, right. So the lesson here is, yes, write your own songs.
Write your own
masters,
songs.
yes.
And anybody can write songs, man. Well, they might not be good ones.
Yeah. We just got a couple minutes left here, and I just want to let everybody know, after we finish here, we'll take a couple questions at the end, and John is going to be back down this hallway signing merchandise, I believe, right? Yes?
Yeah, but I want to just say, on the Treme kit, right? I've had many bands, the original Treme brass band covered the tune. They covered it for, what's the Yucks? What's the name of those?
Uggs?
Uggs. They did it for Uggs.
For an Uggs commercial?
I guess so. Right, but I've had.
So you made some Uggs money, is what you're saying. Yes. You made some Uggs money.
And Mahmoud did it on his new CD.
Mahmoud Choki, the Moroccan-born guitar player who lives in New Orleans now, yeah.
This young lady who I met on the boat last year by the name of Amanda Grissom, she works with adults on the spectrum, basically.
Like autism spectrum.
Right? Am I getting that right? Yes.
Yeah.
Her parents are here. And anyway, they re-recorded the Treme song, right? And I'm doing the lead vocals on it, right? And it sounds pretty good. And she called me the other day, and Tyler Perry's gonna put it in a movie.
Tyler Perry's gonna put that version on.
That's what I hear.
All right, so you may move to Switzerland after all.
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome. That's
It
great.
is awesome, man. I'm so happy about it. And I might have a gig in March going to your house.
And that was a connection made on the Big Easy Cruise
On
last
the
year.
Big Easy Cruise, she came up
Look
to me and she was so sweet. And she said, I want to record you too. And I said, hey.
Look at
What do you
that.
do?
Big Easy Cruise working some magic there.
Right,
I love it.
right.
I love it. All right. Well, does anyone have any questions here before we wrap up with John? Yes, sir.
Can you talk about the song you closed with last night? I don't think I've heard that one before.
It's called God Loves Everyone, and it's written by a guy, Ron Sexsmith. If you don't know what a Sexsmith is, ask your mom and dad. Right, but it was a beautiful tune, and a guy from the Iguanas,
Derek Houston,
Derek
former Iguana
Houston
saxophone player.
He saw me playing at the Bywater Bakery one day, And he came up to me, he says, John, you gotta sing this song, man. This guy's a great writer, and I think his lyrics, you're gonna love them. So, and I did. You know, so that's the guy. You should look him up. He's got some incredible stuff. The songs. Ron Sexsmith.
And that song last night, actually, I think brought some tears to a couple people's eyes as well.
Oh,
So,
yeah, Ron too, man.
yeah, it was intense. It was intense. Any other? Yes, sir.
Yeah, you talked reference about playing instruments in the past. Do you still actively play instruments, and you've thought about playing in public, or do you just play when you're writing music?
Well, I usually play them just for my pleasure. Sometimes other folks, if they can listen. But my cornet, I started with a cornet, and it's the same type. It was a very, very old music company that my grand aunt, who'd be 130, she played when she was a kid. And they gave me that horn. Actually, my mother took, when I was begging for a horn after, you know, I guess she was wondering what wind instrument. She actually told me, I was telling her that my Mamu was my old grand aunt. She said, Mamu has a cornet, right? And I had a speech impediment as a kid. So I think it was because I could repeat what the adults were saying perfectly, and they couldn't speak well. New Orleans, I mean, I couldn't say sausage or sausage. That was New Orleans, right? I couldn't say shrimp, swimp. Anyway, I learned how to say I live on Cedar Street, and it all went away. So when I got that horn, I'm still blowing my cornet, or my pocket trumpet, and I have a cornet also. And I play that usually during Mardi Gras with the crew of St. Anne, and my embouchure right now sucks. Right? But if somebody had a horn, I could probably play something for you. But piano, like I said, I was playing gospel music with these little sanctified churches and spiritualist churches in New Orleans for a while, and studied classical piano at Xavier. You know, so learned some Bach and Chopin and some Debussy.
Do you write on the piano?
I write in my head, man. You know, but I use the horn lots of times for melodies. You know, I think the horn. I use the horn for melodies, and on the piano, man. Sometimes I just write from whatever comes into my head. You know, and yes.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, I think, like I said, we got one more. I'm sorry, I didn't see you. Go ahead.
Yes, this is an interesting story. So, when I was in Korea, I was discharged, I took, they don't let you go home in a uniform like that, you know what I'm saying, with your combat gear. Although you might need it in all So, I checked in all my gear, and one of my friends, just before the pandemic, I think it was, or after, can't remember. He was in Oakland, and he went to a flea market, and he saw this helmet, old combat helmet, with the headband, and it had John Boutté on it, right? And it was my helmet. What are the chances? So he bought it and he sent it back to me. You know what I'm saying? And I looked at it and said, oh my God, because I write just like my dad, right? Especially when I'm printing. You know, I write like my grandmother when I do cursive, right? She taught me that. She told me how to write really well. I think that's why I had a job at the coroner's office, because you couldn't read the doctor's.
Couldn't read the doctors. All right, we're back to the coroner's office. That's a perfect way to start, or to stop.
That's right.
Please, round of applause. John Boutté.